Interviews are soon going to begin for the vacant general manager job with the Montreal Canadiens. In today's video, we're reviewing a recent article by TVA Sports, including 8 names, potential candidates who are believed to have an interview set up here. Plus, we also have some other news around the NHL, including a significant injury in Vegas, a contract extension for the coaching staff in Minnesota, and more details emerging about the shutdown of the World Junior Championships. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're mainly looking at the Montreal Canadiens GM Rumours about all the potential candidates that are expected to be interviewed in early January. But before we get into that, we have a few other quick tidbits of news to discuss here first. Of course, as we know, the World Junior Championships were shut down and canceled. Just the news of that came yesterday. More details have emerged as well, indicating that there were 7 additional positive tests that were identified today for the rest of the test results that they were waiting on. So certainly if they hadn't have canceled it, they would have had a lot more games postponed and more forfeits, and it just would have got messier and messier. And as I stated before, as much as it's unfortunate and I really feel bad for the players, the way this tournament was set up with the new variant coming through and just kind of spreading like wildfire, I really think this was a recipe for disaster. The protocols were not nearly strong enough, and I understand a lot of that is probably financially motivated, but given the circumstances of everything, it just, to me, it was pretty much one of those things from the beginning. You knew it was probably not going to work out, unfortunately, but there is good news that they are going to attempt to hold this tournament at a later date, as well as the other tournaments in the month of January that were already either postponed or canceled, which is hopefully good news for these athletes and for fans looking for more hockey entertainment, of course. So ultimately, it's likely going to happen sometime after the World Championships in May. So we're looking either later May or June, July, August, somewhere in that range. They're probably not going to want to compete with the Stanley Cup playoffs, though. So I'm not sure exactly when exactly they could hold this event. They might have no choice but to compete with NHL playoffs when it comes to ratings and stuff on TV. At the end of the day, it's more important that these games get played and that they can hopefully turn a bit of revenue and profit here. It's hard to say, because obviously these are very important to keep all these these tournaments going for the future. Clearly, one other thing too that was noted when it comes to the cancellation of the U18 women's tournament, it was noted as well that they had to cancel it because Sweden was no longer able to host it, apparently, which I don't really understand, because I've seen news reports out of Swedish media indicating that wasn't entirely true. So I really don't know for sure really what to believe on those fronts, but essentially what the IIHF president Luc Tardif said was that they had to cancel it because that means that another association or another hockey federation can come along and offer to host it, but until it's canceled, if it's postponed, it remains in the hands of the current host. So we'll see what there is for truth to that. I know USA Hockey has been apparently pushing to put together a plan to try to host it somewhere in the U.S. sometime in the next few months, likely in the same time frame that we're talking about rescheduling the World Junior. So hopefully all these tournaments can eventually be played this year. And they did say that even though obviously these players are kind of getting older, ages are changing, that regardless, everybody that was eligible for the tournament now will still be eligible regardless of when it's played later in the year. So we'll see where that goes. When sticking with the same sort of theme when it comes to COVID-related issues, the NHL is still rescheduling a bunch of games and postponing a lot of games, especially in Canadian markets. We've seen a lot of Canadian provinces report record COVID cases here in the last day or two, and many of which have imposed new restrictions, even more than before. And the level of fans and buildings is really starting to shrink at a rapid pace. So I know, for example, I believe Alberta and BC are still at 50%, but that's the highest. Ontario's capped it at 1,000. So the Leafs, in a sense, that's the max they could do. I believe Manitoba is only allowing a maximum of like 250. So the Jets are pretty much at 0. And I believe that the Canadiens in Montreal, I believe they're not allowed fans at all, if I'm not mistaken, as well right now. So they're trying to reschedule a lot of those games for later when they can hopefully have more fans, or at least a higher degree of fans in the building. So it's quite possible that a lot of these Canadian NHL teams might not even play any home games during the month of January. It's all still being worked on behind the scenes. We really don't know exactly how this is all going to work out, but they're trying their hardest to not play games in empty buildings so they still have an opportunity to make money. Some of these ones as well, even if they have some fans, they're not allowing the concessions to be open, which is also a big revenue driver for the league. So they're trying to see what they can do to avoid all that. And it's going to be a scheduling mess and a scheduling nightmare, and it's really kind of complicated and difficult to comprehend how they can come close to completing an 82-game schedule at this point, but we'll see what they come up with here in the next little bit. Now, one other quick news as well that was kind of significant for Vegas is Max Pacioretty, who has already missed significant time this year, is out again, and this time he's out long-term. Again, this time he had to have surgery on his wrist, and he's been listed as out indefinitely. Probably fair to say a couple of months anyways. It's difficult to say, but as much as this does hurt, it is going to give the Golden Knights some flexibility. You know, Jack Eichel's rehabbing right now, going through the rehab process after having his neck surgery, and obviously having Pacioretty's substantial salary on long-term injury reserve will certainly decrease what they need to move around or trade out in order to activate Jack Eichel when he's ready, because that's believed to be probably sometime around end of January, early February, and that range is likely what we're looking at if things go well. It could be a little bit further into February, but either way, it could just buy them more time. I mean, they have a variety of players we've talked about as potential trade bait that they could move to open up necessary space, but it's not going to be easy. But like I said, if they're going to have a player of Pacioretty's impact on the team out long term, at least that's the only way to kind of put a silver lining on it, is it could help with Eichel's return. But depending on how long Pacioretty is out, it's still, in order to activate him, it doesn't really solve the situation longer term. It just kind of punts things down the road a little bit further, but we'll see. It's still a big blow for Vegas regardless of how you shake it. And of course, the good news for the Minnesota Wild coaching staff ahead of the New Year's and ahead of the Winter Classic, Dean Evason and his entire staff have been given contract extension believed to be in the 3-year range for all parties involved. Of course, they've done a terrific job with this Wild franchise since he's taken over as head coach. Likely going to be in the conversation, possibly here for Coach of the Year. You just never know. There's still lots of hockey left to be played. But the Minnesota Wild, of course, with the arrival of Kirill Kaprizov, the change in coaching staff, and everything that we've seen with Bill Guerin and he's done, this team has really been transformed and really changed a lot over the past couple of seasons. They're certainly a lot more fun and more exciting to watch than they really have been in a really long time, maybe even ever. So we'll see. But this is good news for the Wild coaching staff. I think they've done a great job. They certainly deserve the contract extensions. They were one of a few other coaches around the NHL that were kind of entering that period where they're eligible here in their last year of their contracts to get extended. And this was, to me, probably a no-brainer for Bill Guerin and the Wild to take care of. Now, as I mentioned, the bigger news of the day we want to focus on is the Montreal Canadiens search for a general manager. We know they've hired Jeff Gorton. He's been on a job for a little while now, president of hockey operations, and he was going to handle the GM duties until he names the GM himself to work with them as part of the management team in Montreal. Of course, we've heard lots of names thrown around as potential candidates, but a recent article here in the last 24 to 48 hours from TVA Sports and Renaud Lavoie outlines 8 candidates they believe to have an interview here with the Montreal Canadiens, and those interviews are scheduled to start taking place sometime early in January after the new year hits. So certainly I want to take a look at these 8 candidates and see what we think and which ones are the more likely ones to possibly land the job. Now, of course, there is a possibility they could expand this list, so I wouldn't necessarily say that somebody's not mentioned here. Doesn't mean they won't be considered. Doesn't mean they won't get an interview, but there's certainly lots of interesting names in a very diverse group here, including a couple of females who could certainly, break through here and have a big NHL role and really help diversify things and kind of pave the way for more women to get these opportunities and for bigger roles on the in the NHL as well. So let's go through the list here. Now, of course, one of them would be Marc Denis. Marc Denis is an actual hockey analyst, a former player, former goaltender. Obviously, he's worked on the media side since his playing days. Doesn't really have a lot of experience when it comes to working in a front office, but of course he's a player. He knows the game extremely well. Obviously, he's French, which is important for them to have a French-speaking general manager. So he checks some of the boxes, but the fact that a lot of the other people on this list have a lot lot more experience when it comes to either negotiating contracts or working in management roles elsewhere. Is a good candidate maybe, but I think he's one of the more less likely guys to actually land a job here and be successful. Now, of course, one of the names that we heard, which was mentioned from Elliotte Friedman after the original Jeff Gorton press conference, after he was first hired and introduced by Jeff Molson, Gorton mentioned about thinking outside the box kind of mentioned some different candidates that might not be traditional candidates that you would think of that he would want to talk to. And Elliotte Friedman speculated that could be player agent Kent Hughes. Now, Hughes, again, is mentioned in this article and is on this list believed to have an interview. So, of course, Kent Hughes as a player agent, very much used to negotiating contracts. So, clearly, that's a huge asset. A lot of agents can be considered for GM type roles. We haven't seen a lot of them kind of jump from one side of the fence to the other, but it certainly makes a lot of sense that they be highly qualified and have a lot of the same types of skill sets. There's obviously more to being a GM than just contracts, but it's certainly a big part of it. Of course, Hughes is the agent for Chris Letang and Patrice Bergeron, as well as some other younger players like Drake Batherson and Darnell Nurse. So he certainly has a pretty good group of players that he represents. I had mentioned way back after he was first mentioned as an agent, there was some speculating that could he help bring some of his high-profile UFA clients to Montreal, because Chris Letang, Patrice Bergeron, both on expiring contracts in their respective NHL cities, both French-speaking, Quebec-born players. Would they have interest to come back to Montreal? I'm really not really sure we're going to see anything like that happen. I mean, I guess you can't never completely rule it out, but both players seem to be quite happy in their existing situations. I don't know what they're going to end up doing. If Montreal needs a bit of a retool, not really sure that they kind of make the most sense to bring in here, but either way, it was just a quick rumor that was generating and going around when that name first was kind of come to the forefront as a potential candidate. But I mean, I wouldn't rule out Kent Hughes as being a real legitimate shot here. Like I said, he can negotiate contracts, has all that agent experience. I think he will stand a decent chance and stronger than some of the names here on this list for sure. Like another one, Stéphane Quintal, of course, a former player, Quebec-born, French-speaking, checks a lot of those boxes off, knows the game very, very well. Of course, in case you don't recall, Stéphane Quintal is the former head of the Department of Player Safety. He was the last one to hold that position before the current guy, George Parros. He was in between Brendan Shanahan and George Parros. Did that for, I think it was 3 to 4 years. Then he vacated that job. Doesn't really have any front office experience in the NHL, but obviously, a guy who's been involved in the game of hockey for a big part of his life here. So as much as he's, probably has a few things that he could bring to the table, experience is not one of them. So like Marc Denis, I don't think we can completely rule him out. They know the game well from being former players and being around the game their whole life, but their experience is very much different after their playing days. So I would think that Quintal and Denis probably a little bit less likely to land a job, but you can just never really say never here. Another key member of this list is Matthew Darche. Of course, Darche, a former player, played with the Habs briefly as well. Currently the director of hockey operations for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Julien Brisebois, I know Brisebois himself at one point was heavily rumored to eventually maybe be the GM for the Canadiens. Of course, that was back before when he was assistant GM for the Lightning. There's obviously lots of times that we've heard about the potential dismissal of Marc Bergevin, which never indeed happened here, of course, until very recently. But at that point, years back, whenever time the rumor would possibly come up if Montreal had a bad, string of games or they were low in the standings, anything like that, Brisebois was one of those names that's been kind of mentioned about maybe coming home to be the GM of the Habs, of course. But then Yzerman leaves Tampa. He gets the job in Tampa. They've got back-to-back Stanley Cups there. Really, he's got no reason to leave Tampa. Darche, on the other hand, would get a big promotion and a chance to be the GM, so that would have interest. Of course, he's been a key part of their front office team in Tampa. Of course, a former player, French-speaking, has front office experience and a couple Stanley Cups to his name in that role. So certainly you can understand why he's been so highly regarded and is considered a strong contender here in this situation. Of course, that leads us to Daniel Briere, a former player as well, of course, French-speaking, born in the province of Quebec, played briefly with the Montreal Canadiens near the latter part of his career, and has history with Jeff Gorton as well. So certainly there's a lot of connections there, a lot of boxes checked just a nose regard. He has front office experience since the end of his playing days. He's had roles in the general manager field as an assistant GM and GM for lower level hockey teams. So certainly been working his way up and has been considered somebody who's, eventually going to be an NHL general manager. Maybe not quite as of yet. Hard to say, but given his history with Gorton, would that give him a bit of an inside edge is certainly a possibility. And of course, one of the most recognizable names here that everybody will know is former Habs goaltender Patrick Waugh. Patrick Waugh publicly had information out there saying that he was very, very interested in this job before ever even being contacted by Montreal. We hadn't really heard a lot about the GM candidates until this article came out. I know in the early days of the GM search, there was numerous reporters saying that as of that point that Waugh hadn't been contacted, but it looks as though he's on this list and does have an interview. Of course, he has a lot of experience when it comes to coaching and management. Of course, running the Quebec Ramparts. He's worked with the Colorado Avalanche. Longtime player. A lot of his more of experience really when it comes to the management stuff has been more at the junior level. But of course, like I said, he's head coach in Colorado where he worked with Joe Sakic for a few years. Started to have decent success, but obviously didn't really, gel well with Sakic off the ice because Patrick Waugh really comes off as a guy who wants a lot of say, a lot of control, likes to have the power of the decision making on his own. So automatically, as much as he checks a lot of the boxes there, being one of the big-time name former players. I mean, of all these guys we said were former players, and not only former players, but former Habs players, like he's one of the greatest of all time. So certainly if you want to, have something that's going to, make the fans be crazy for Patrick Waugh being back in Montreal, like that would do it. But obviously if you look at his qualifications, like I said, there is some parts there, and there is some stuff that's, positives that you can like. But there's certainly a lot of people, myself included, would say I would have concerns about how well he would work with Jeff Gorton without butting heads with him and wanting more power, more say, and that may not go over well because many feel that Gorton is going to essentially be the decision maker on a lot of items and that this person is going to be more of the face to the media, more of the voice in dealing with the French media and all that kind of stuff, whereas Gorton will be more of the decision driver. So that may not sit well. It's really difficult to say, but he certainly has an interview, it appears, and could be one of the stronger candidates. He does have a good case here, especially with the long history, so it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. And of course, as I mentioned, we have a little bit of diversity here. We have a few females in the mix for this job as well, which is certainly great to see. We have Emilie Castonguay, of course, is one of the first actually NHLPA approved player agent. She represents Alexis Lafreniere, the former first overall draft pick from a couple of years ago, current member of the New York Rangers. So she's certainly somebody who's been in the mix, a former player in her own right. Back in 2020, Sportsdom had an article out with the 25 most powerful women in hockey, and she was near the top of that list. So certainly somebody who's well accomplished and certainly has a great understanding of the game, French speaking, obviously working on the agent side of the game, very, astute when it comes to contract negotiations and things of that nature. So certainly has a lot to offer here. And if the Canadiens really want to go in a more diverse area and open things up, she certainly would be a terrific candidate here to consider as well. And of course, the other female candidate is Danielle Sauvageau, who's also a former, coach and general manager at the national level, was obviously a big part of Team Canada and coaching and managing them for the Olympic Games, where obviously helped them win several gold medals. So obviously has a lot of experience in that regard. So certainly she has a lot of qualifications, from her coaching experience to her management experience to the fact that she's been involved with the game a long time. Obviously French speaking, Quebec born, lots there to like as well. So nice to see two high profile females certainly in the mix. Like I said, out of the 8, I think there's probably 2 or 3 that don't have a great chance to land a job and probably will be out of the running early on. At least I would suspect. So that's like obviously Marc Denis and probably Stéphane Quintal, to me, are probably the 2 weakest candidates. And obviously, as much as it would be a great story and highly entertaining to see Patrick Waugh in that job, and I do think there's a lot of things to like, I'm just not sure that him and Jeff Gorton would really work well together. And for that, I'm not really sure he's going to stand a great chance either. I would think between Matthew Darche, Ken Hughes, Daniel Briere, or either of the 2 females here in Castonguay and Sauvageau would stand probably the greatest chance to land this job. And I don't think that I also won't be surprised at all if more candidates emerge and Jeff Gorton decides to talk to a few additional people. So out of all these candidates, who do you think would be the best fit to work with Jeff Gorton? Who do you think makes the most sense for the Montreal Canadiens to hire as their next general manager and help take this team through obviously a difficult season and going through a bit of a reset, rebuild, or whatever it's going to be moving forward? Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.